Revelations chapter 11 and verse 14. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Quanawath, come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will, it is edifying. Lord will, it is straight to the point. And a World War III is definitely here, right? For those that have been on their watchtower, right? You just saw that Saudi Arabia, right, ultimately just entered into the war, right? Helping America to basically strike, right? Shoot missiles at, Iran's proxy armies over in Iraq, right? So you got more and more nations, right, that are ultimately becoming militarily, involved, in this war between, America and Iran, which is, spiraling into, a world war, right? Which it is now, right? It is, and has been, right? A world war, right? And this is what? World War number 3, and there's talks that Russia, right, is going to mobilize, roughly 300,000, to 500,000 military, troops, to do, if you will, a ground invasion, right, on Ukraine. Well, I came across this article right here on the peoplesvoice.tv. It says Trump orders Pentagon to prepare for mass conscription as ground troops mobilize for Iran invasion. And see, this is something that has been talked about, right, by Trump, saying that they were ultimately possibly going to do, a ground invasion if that's what it came to, right? Well, now, right, Trump is basically, telling the Pentagon, right, to prepare for mass conscription, which for those that don't know, right, is ultimately a draft, right? That's basically the draft. And we understand that, what was it, last year, they basically, forced, actually it might have been the beginning of this year, if I'm not mistaken, or the end of last year, they basically forced, everyone from the ages of 18 and up, right, to be automatically, right, registered for, the selective service, right, which again is the draft, right, which we've been telling y'all, right, starting with the elder apostles of Great Millstone on down, right, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Shad, that there is going to be a draft, and a lot of men, right, that are here in America, right, are ultimately going to be forced, to go, and fight, in World War III, right, overseas, man, But I'll read this a little. It's kind of long. I'm going to try to, get through this article. When you see the title, it says the Trump administration is quietly preparing for a mass escalation that goes far beyond the airstrikes we've seen over the past 2 weeks. Multiple sources confirm the president has ordered the Pentagon to draw up plans for a national military draft within 3 weeks. And now, they tend to put, dates on things, man, but it might be sooner, it might be even a little later, right? We don't necessarily know, but we'll see how that plays out, right? It says as ground troops begin massing for a potential invasion of Iran, right? So they're ultimately going to be, entering into Iran, right? From what they're saying, right? It says while the corporate media parrots Trump's claims of good talks and diplomatic progress, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Select it, right? It says Israel's war machine is grinding into gear and it's coming for America's youth, right? And we just also, was seen recently, right, that America and Israel, right, ultimately joined or merged, right, their military, you know, which is heavy, a huge step, right, in the direction, of fulfillment, of Jacob's trouble, right, the hour of temptation, with, second Ezra 15, second Ezra 16, but also, right, in a huge, step towards, furthering, right, this third world's war, because as we read, matter of fact, I'll grab it right now, right, as we read in, Jeremiah, I think it's 50 and 45, if I'm not mistaken, right? It says, therefore, hear ye the counsel of Yahweh by Hashem Yahushua, that he hath purposed, it's like that he hath taken against Babylon, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate. Wisdom, and the least of the flock is going back to the small hats, those 1948ers, right, who are committing all different types of war crimes and just being evil, right, over there, in the so-called Middle East, right, to the Palestinians, which is ultimately the reason for this war popping off in the first place, right, between America and Iran, right, is what Israel, right, the small hats were doing to the Palestinians, right, and that ultimately got Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, right, involved, in this whole thing, showing you again that the World War III is popping off, and it is getting worse, which call law Yahweh Shemel Shah, man, prophecy is speaking loud and clear, right, as you read in Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, right, but we'll keep going. It says, only on July 24th, Trump announced he was pausing strikes on Iran to give diplomacy a chance. But here's what they're not telling you. This pause is merely a tactical regrouping while the Pentagon prepares for the big one, a full-scale ground invasion. Again, they're going to need troops for that, right? It says, which some of this is, irrelevant, but we'll read. It says, Trump himself admitted the clock is ticking. In an interview with Axios, he declared, not much time. Either it goes fast or not at all. This isn't the language of peace. It's an ultimatum. And see, we understand that Esau, Edom, right, is trying to, speed things up, right? And it all goes back to, this truth, right? Yahweh Bashem El Shah raising up the prophets, right? Speaking this word, speaking this truth, and it's causing Esau, right, to see that his end, is here, right? So what is he doing? He's trying to speed things up, right? He's trying to hurry, hit the establishment of his NWO, right? You read that in Revelations 12 and 12, Let's grab that as well, right? So Revelations 12 and verse 12, it says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Right? Esau knows he has a short time. This is why he made that statement. Right? As we'll read it again. It says, Trump himself admitted the clock is ticking. In an interview with Axios, he's declared not much time. Either it goes fast or not at all. So Esau's trying to speed this thing up. Esau's trying to hurry this thing up as fast as he possibly can. And that's why he stated, right, that there's going to be a possible draft, right, within 3 weeks, right? It says, what's really being planned, right? The Pentagon is reportedly considering multiple ground operation scenarios, including a staggering plan to send thousands of U.S. troops deep into an Iranian meat grinder on behalf of Israel. Allegedly, the troops would be tasked with seizing enriched uranium from underground nuclear facilities. And see, this is what it's really been about this whole time. Yes, Esau is trying to forward his NWO, but Esau wants to be able to have, all the resources, right? We've seen him do the same thing, with Venezuela, right? Capture, and basically took Maduro and his wife, which we haven't heard anything of, the two, right? What happened to Maduro, right? President Maduro of Venezuela, right? What happened to them, right? We haven't heard anything of them, but nonetheless, right? What happened, right? He took the oil, right? And it was made known, right? He said it on live TV, that they were going to ultimately take and control, the oil, right? And that was, how, convenient, if you will, right? That it was right before they went on this, this strike on Iran and the Strait of Hormuz being closed, and Venezuela has the largest oil reserve in it with 303 billion barrels of oil, right? Crude oil, right? So how convenient, right? But see, here we are again, right? Esau wants to be able to have, again, all the resources, right? Not just oil, right? Esau wants everything, right? He's fucking greedy, man. He already has, as the scriptures say, has more than his heart can, his heart can desire, right? More than his heart can wish, but yet he still wants more, right? He's greedy, So this is the plan, right? To take their, their uranium, right? They don't want, Iran to have nuclear weapons, man, because they know what is going to happen, right? They're trying to stop the process of Iran, right, creating these nuclear missiles, which Iran already has nuclear missiles, man. They're already a nuclear power, right? But America's trying to stop it, but that's not going to happen, right? It says, according to the New York Post, the White House is actively studying a commando-style mission where elite forces, including Navy SEALs, would storm Iranian nuclear sites, dismantle mines, and physically extract stockpiles of enriched material. Military analysts are calling the plan absurd and a potential massacre waiting to happen. And that's exactly what this is going to be, right? World War III as a whole, right? Not just to American soldiers, right? But to all nations' soldiers, right? It's going to be a complete massacre, man. A straight up massacre, right? It says, which, it starts to name some of the, We'll jump up and read this last little bit. It says, The Economist notes that while a ground invasion seems unlikely due to immense risks, the fact that U.S. officials are openly discussing it signals a terrifying shift in war aims. The magazine outlined 3 potential escalations. Expanded attacks on Iranian infrastructure, which they've been doing, right? Bridges and, other shit, right? Sanitation sites. It says strikes on nuclear facilities, which America has been doing. And then what? Number 3. Full-scale ground invasion, which is what we're looking at, and in order for America to do so, right, they're going to have to enact a draft, right? You got a lot of American, soldiers, right, that don't want to, go over there and fight anymore, right? They don't want to fight, right? Scriptures talk about they have foreborn to fight, They don't want to fight for America. They don't want to fight for, for Israel, really, because that's who they're going to be fighting for, right? It's for Israel. They don't want to fight for Israel, man. So they're ultimately going to do what? They're going to draft, they're going to draft people and send those people over, And again, it's going to be a massacre of untrained recruits, right? People who are untrained, right? Who don't have any actual, they might just, draft and then put them through a 1 or 2 week crash course, to get them somewhat prepared and then send them out there, which again, a lot of men are going to die, in this war, right? We read that, in Second Esdras, the 16th chapter, right? And was that verse 33 being the point, right? It says the virgins shall mourn, having no bridegrooms. The women shall mourn, having no husbands. Their daughters shall mourn, having no helpers. In the wars shall their bridegrooms be destroyed, and their husbands shall perish of famine. So this right here, again, is showing you what's going to happen, right? A lot of men, right? You are going to have women, right, that ultimately, get drafted as well, or that are, already in the military, that might, volunteer to go over there or ultimately forced to go over there, but it's mainly going to be men, right, that are going to be drafted, and they're going to be forced to go over there and fight, and they're going to die. They're going to die over there, man. Right? They're not going to come back. Right? This is not something that, that America is going to do. Guys are going to be able to do multiple deployments. No. Man, this world war, right? World War III is going to be the war to end all wars, man. It's going to be the war to end all wars. And America's gonna be on the receiving end of the worst of it. Right? America's gonna be, because again, right, we have to understand that we're looking at, what does it say? The Northern Army. Right? Joel 2:20, it says, "But I will remove far off from you the northern army, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, with his face toward the east, and his hinder part toward the uttermost sea. And his stink shall come up, and his savor, and his ill savor shall come up, because he hath done great things." So the Lord Yahweh Shem Shai is going to drive the American army, right, or the American military over into, the so-called Middle East, man, to fight. Right? That's going to be what? The Valley of Yahweh Shaphat. Right? We read that in Joel 3 and verse 1. It says, "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Yahweh Shaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land." Right? So that right there, that pleading is going into judge, right? Let's go into that in the blue letter, right? To prove it, right? When you go into that word, plead, right? Let's grab it. And I will plead with them, right? Shaphat, right? It says to judge, right? To judge, to decide controversy, right? To execute judgment, right? Condemning, right? Condemning or punishing, right? To be judged, right? So that's ultimately what Yahweh Bashim Shai is going to do, right? He's going to judge them, and that's judgment's going to come via Yahweh Shai, right? Cracking the sky and destroying these armies, right? Destroying these armies, right? And all this is all while simultaneously, right, these nations are pushing that button, right, sending those nuclear missiles, and America receiving that judgment, right? All this is going to be simultaneously, man, right? All simultaneously, right? Yahweh Bashim Shai is going to destroy these armies, right? He's going to deliver the elect and destroy America, right? All within a very short period of time. America will be destroyed in 1 hour, right? It'll take 1 hour to destroy America, right? It's not going to take long, right? Those ICBM nuclear missiles are going to hit, But I want to grab this, right? I was ultimately going to, take this lesson in a different direction, but I want to hit this because, again, right, that judgment is going to be, right, when Yahweh Shai comes, and flexes, right, that muscle, that spiritual muscle, right? This is 2nd Esdras 13 and verse 1. It says, "And it came to pass after 7 days, I dreamed a dream by night." And this is Ezra, right? Verse 2, it says, "And lo, there arose a wind from the sea, that it moved all the waves thereof. And I beheld, and lo, that man wax strong with the thousands of heaven." And that's talking about Yahweh Shai coming in that power and great glory, right? We read that in Isaiah the 47th chapter. We read that in Jude, right? At Enoch prophesied of Yahweh Shai coming, right? We read that in Revelations the 19th chapter, right? Yahweh Shai coming with that power and that great glory with the thousands of heaven, right? It says, and when he turned his countenance to look, all the things trembled that were seen under him. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth faileth when it filleth the fire. And after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men out of number, right? Which is talking about, again, those armies, right? The military from all these different nations being gathered into that valley, right? That valley of Yahweh, right? The valley of decision, right? As the scriptures also call it, you know? It says, from the four winds of the heaven to subdue the men that came out of the sea, right? So these nations are going to be fighting against each other, right? And what's going to happen, right? Just like you've seen in Independence Day, right? The movie with Will Smith, right? And even the second movie, right? When a so-called alien invader came, what happened? You had all the nations, right, gather together and come to fight against that foreign, that foreign entity, if you will, right? That so-called alien in those movies. Well, guess what? It's not going to be an alien. It's going to be Yahushua and the chariots, right? The angels in those chariots, man, right? Which are so-called black men, right? It's going to be millions of so-called black men, right? Invading the earth, starting with Yahushua, right? The greatest of us all, right? And it's going to be straight up judgment and slaughter, right? Straight up slaughter. It is going to be a slaughter, right? We read in that article, they're talking about a ground invasion going into Iran is going to be a slaughter, Well, how much more when Yahushua comes and destroys all their armies, Because that's what's going to happen, right? You even had, what is his name? Ronald Reagan, right? Basically, make that statement. There's a video of it, right? Which you can go and find it, that he stated that, if there was an alien invasion, right, to happen, would we not all, come together and fight against it, right? He made that statement, roughly paraphrasing what he said, And that's prophecy, right? That's what's going to take place, right? It says, verse 6, but I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain and flew upon it. Again, going into that fathership, right? But I would have seen the region or place where out the hill was graven, and I could not, because it was that big, right? You got the International Space Station, right? Ultimately having video, massive. We're talking about chariots 7, 8, 15, 20 times the size of the earth. You can fit. I think they said. I think by Esau's astrologers or whatever you want to call them, man. They said that the sun is so big that you can fit 163 million Earths inside it. Right. Well, there was a chariot sighting, right? Something that was coming out of the earth. They're saying that it was probably 1,000 times bigger than the earth. Maybe not that much, maybe 100 times, maybe 200 times, but still extremely larger than the earth, man. That's what Yahushua is going to be coming on, right? It says, and I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain and flew upon it, right? Being inside the fathership, man. He might even, be on top of it, You never know, right? It says, but I would have seen the region or place wherewith the hill was graven, and I could not. And after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet durst fight. Right. And I always think about that, that part in that movie Independence Day where they're sitting, they're getting basically briefed, right? This is right as the invasion happened. They're getting briefed, right? Will Smith is sitting next to that white dude, and I think he asked him, I think he leaned over and said, are you scared? He said, no. And then when they were in the actual planes, right, he would, they, basically made mention of, that he's scared, but he can't turn back. Right. But he just can't turn back. I'd have to go watch the movie to get the, proper quotes. But, for those that have seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about, right? That so-called white dude, right? He was scared, but yet they had to fight, you know? And the Lord's going to put that spirit on them to fight, make their asses fight, man, so they can get destroyed, right? And it says, verse 9, it says, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand nor held sword, nor any instrument of war, but only I saw that he had sent out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests, right? And Yahweh Shai is coming in that, angelical body, right? That spiritual body. So he very well, right? Scriptures say we know in part, we prophesy in part, right? We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, right? We just know what is going to happen, right? The things that have already happened, the prophecies that have already taken place, we can go in and like the elder apostle Rimlam had said, we can tell you about those things that had happened and give you great detail and break it down that way. But these things that are coming, right, we don't know exactly what they look like, right? But we know that according to prophecy, according to scripture, they're going to happen. We'll just have to see and wait to see exactly how it plays out. But getting back to the point, right, Yahweh Shai very well could have, that a breath of fire, right? As soon as he opens his mouth, he's sending out, fucking fire breath, like a dragon, himself, right? But this is really talking about those chariots sending out those laser beams like you've seen on Independence Day. Again, it both could happen. Both can take place, very well. We're just going to have to wait and see, right? Verse 11, it says, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude nothing was to be perceived but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. So going back to the point I had made earlier, right, when we brought it up in 2nd Esdras, the 16th chapter, where it talks about their husbands, right, the bridegrooms, the men are all gonna perish, right? Hey, well, guess what? Hell yeah. They're going to die, right? When they go over there, there's no coming back, right? Again, there is going to be a war that's going to take place. It's going to build up, right, to all nations, right, getting involved in this war, right? And there's going to be slaughter leading up to the greatest slaughter of all time, right? Yahweh Shai coming and destroying these armies, man, right? So there will be slaughter leading up to that point. But this right here, no one will survive unless you're the elect of the nation of Israel. I'm not saying that the whole, Yahweh Shai is going to come and destroy the whole world. No, he's going to destroy all these armies, right? We read that as well in Isaiah, the 35th chapter. And it's like Isaiah 34 and verse 1. It says, come near, ye nations, to hear, and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation, which when you look up that word indignation, it goes into a righteous anger, right? It says, for the indignation of Yahweh B'Hashem El Shai is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. That's right, man. Right? So Yahweh Shai is coming to destroy the armies of these nations, man. Right? So that way they don't have no power, right, to defend themselves when they're being put into slavery, right? Because that's what's going to happen, right? You read there in Revelations, right, 13 verses 9 and 10, right? Psalms 149, you read, there's multiple scriptures on these heathens going into captivity, right? They can fight against it if they have an army. Now, granted, right, even if if Yahweh Shai left their armies, there's still no match for an angelic power, right? The angelic power that Yahweh Shai is coming with, right? They're no match for Yahweh B'Hashem El Shai on any kind of level, right? Yahweh B'Hashem El Shai, could just make it to where all their guns just don't work. He's the one that allowed them to create those things. And the Lord can ultimately have it to where those things just dissipate in their hand as soon as they go to grab them. But hey, this is again according to prophecy. The Lord is going to destroy their armies, and the rest of those people, right? The nations, right, that sent those armies out, those nations are going to be put into captivity, right? Into slavery, you know? And again, that's according to prophecy, man. You know, so hey, really this military conscription, right, is only going to lead to, furthering this World War III, right? And again leading to Yahweh's coming and destroying these military members, man. You know? Which is beautiful, man. Lord will, it happens real soon, man. But this is what's coming, right? This is what's prophesied to take place, you know. But that's all I got, man. Lord will, is edifying. Lord will, straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak Wadash, that belongs to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.